Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk a little bit about the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, if you're one of the half a dozen people in the country who think he's doing a good job, then this may not be for you. Or I should warn you, I may not be entirely polite about him because I'm not sure I'm his biggest fan. When I was looking at what I might talk about today, I looked at a few of the things that happened this week in typical things that happen every week, really, in Brexit Britain. And I could have talked about the Australian beef deal or the Australian trade deal, which came into effect this week, and how we discovered that the deal was actually cooked up between Johnson and Scott Morrison, the then Prime Minister of Australia. It was cooked up over a dinner, apparently written out on scraps of paper, and how the Australians are laughing still about what a bad deal it is for us, and what a good deal it is for them. There is a clip actually on the internet showing a current affairs program in Australia laughing in hysterics about what a bad deal it was and what on earth are we going to export to them that they want. And as everybody knows, we're going to bring this beef 12,000 miles, and in the process, we're going to put a lot of our beef farmers out of business. But there you go. I could have talked about the fact that about the levelling up grant, about the fact that £150,000 was given to somebody who owns a sort of amusement arcade, I think, in Hastings. It just happens to be a Russian person, somebody called Lyubov Chernukin, who just happens to have been a big donor to the Conservative Party. I'm sure that's a coincidence. I could have talked about the fact that Eurostar, who previously operated from 13 stations, are in future only going to be operating from 4 because trade is so bad following Brexit. I could have talked about the fact that following Brexit, we're now able to change certain regulations, health and safety, and so on. And for example, the BPAs, which is the gas that they put in food packages of food to keep it fresh and so on. Our minimum limits now are 20,000 times higher than the minimum limits in the EU. So that's one good thing. We can keep our food fresher a lot longer with these chemicals. I could have talked about the fact that there was some news slipped out last week, a report by the Public Accounts Committee, which showed that during Sunak's tenure as Chancellor, during the COVID period, of course, fraud against the government went up from 5.1 billion to 21 billion, about quadrupled, in fact. I could have talked about the Teesside free port. This is this free port that Sunak's so very keen on. He's always going about the free ports and how they're going to change the economy and so on. I think the guy who was involved in setting it all up, this Ben Houchen, I think he's going to the House of Lords, so he'd be very happy. But the son of one of the two guys who are running this free port and who are making a huge amount of money out of it because of the way the deal was structured and so on. The son of one of them is going to be head of security, I believe, at this free port, and he just happens to have previously in a few years ago, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for dealing in drugs. He's a big drugs guy, apparently. And of course, Freeport's one of the biggest criticisms of Freeport's is the fact that they're just perfect for smuggling. But I'm sure he won't take advantage of that possibility. I could have talked about the fact that Larry Summers, the former US Treasurer, he said that in his view Brexit was an historic economic error. I could have talked about Johnson's honours list, which is being published as I'm speaking now, and how Sunak had to really concede everything because he's terrified about Lady Hallett getting whatever Johnson's got, which will embarrass him. And I could have talked about how Bishop Barnier was on Preston last week, and how he said that the door is always open for us to return to the EU if we should want to do so. Actually, on that subject, whilst I've been doing these videos, whenever I've even mentioned the possibility of returning to the EU, there's been a whole chorus of voices explaining why this is not possible. You can't do it for this reason, can't do it for that reason, can't do rules and rules and rules, you can't do it. It'll be 100 years before we can join again. And it's that sort of negative attitude that holds people back. If you run a business, every day you're coming up against things that can't be done, but you've got to find ways of doing them. And when you've got Barnier and Guido Verhofstadt saying the door's open, it does at least mean you can start having some talks. But of course that isn't going to happen because we know the Tories are never going to go back, and we know Starmer. He over his dead body will even go anywhere near the EU, which is a great pity because, as far as I can see it, and I've said this many times before, our economy is in free fall at the moment. It's just going down and down and down. The numbers are constantly getting worse and worse. And we've got so many problems in front of us, especially with falling house prices, especially with, as I keep saying, food prices, which are going to go through the roof later on this year if we ever impose import controls. And so inevitably, at some stage, we will go back to the EU with our tail between our legs and asking for some sort of deal. But I fear that we'll have to go really, really well down before that actually happens, which is sad and stupid. But let me talk about Sunak, which is what I really wanted to discuss, because I've watched him all along, and my view of him is sort of goes down every week, and I just see him now as just a really pathetic figure. I think he's absolutely pathetic. He is so weak. His weakness, he exudes weakness and vulnerability, and he's one of those guys, I think, who we've all met these people at school who are real swats, and they study, but they're not really that clever. You often meet people who perhaps got no education at all, but they're really sharp. They're street smart, they call it. But they have a way of thinking in a way that maybe a lot of other people don't. As they take into account a whole load of factors, and they're really quite smart. And street smart does some of that. But Sunak's not like this. He's really dull. Have you ever listened to him in an interview and heard him say anything interesting? Have you ever been made to laugh by Sunak? Has he ever said anything funny or witty? He's just a dull accountant. And I don't think he knows what he's doing. I don't think he's a good political operator. And I think he's just decided that all he has to do is just continuously ad nauseum repeat this mantra about, you ask him, you say to him, what do you think about what's going on in Ukraine? What about the war? And he'll say, my priority is to deal with the my 5 pledges and so on, and they are to halve inflation and to expand the economy, grow the economy, to pay off the debt, and to halve the waiting list, and to stop small boats. And that's what the British people want me to do. And he says it every time to any question, on endlessly. He was interviewed by Anushka Ashtana in Washington last week, and he actually came out with that mantra, those 5 pledges, 3 times in the space of a 5-minute interview. And he's got nothing else. That's him. These silly pledges. As far as the pledges are concerned, inflation, he's got very little control over it. As far as expanding the economy is concerned, how's he going to do it? He never says how he's going to do it. The economy is doing so much worse than it was doing before we left the EU that even to get back to where we were is going to be an enormous task. It's going to take years and years and years. He wants to grow the economy, and he wants to pay down the debt. Well, you can't pay down the debt if you don't grow your economy. And as far as the waiting lists are concerned, this is a prime minister of a party that's been in power for 13 years. We've got 7 million people on the waiting list. 7 million people. Millions of those, no doubt, cannot work. We're short of workers. Why have we got 7 million on the waiting list if they've been looking after the health service? And all the time we're being told we're building more hospitals than ever before. We've got more doctors, more nurses. Nurses, incidentally, there was a thing in the paper last week about how in Ghana they're getting really anxious about the fact they're losing so many nurses. So we've got rid of all the Europeans, get rid of all those Italian nurses, those dreadful Spanish, German and French nurses. We don't want them coming here working on our health service. Oh no. Let's get some from Ghana. Let's get them from all these poor countries. It's immoral apart from anything else. But anyway, he goes on and on and on about these 5 pledges, and it's just so one-dimensional. It's just awful, and all the time we know he's terrified of his party. And last week, I mean, just to show how pathetic he is, on Monday he went to Dover, didn't he? And so he comes out of Downing Street, he gets in his big flash car, and he's driven to some airport with some huge, great, expensive helicopter, because he doesn't do public transport. He doesn't go on trains. I don't suppose he's ever been on a train, leave alone a tube or a bus. And I'm sure he has never flown other than first class on a plane. No, he doesn't do public transport. So he goes in this extremely expensive helicopter all the way down to Dover. He gets out there and he makes a speech. He goes through his 5 pledges 100 times over. Every time anyone speaks to him, he goes through his 5 pledges. And then he goes down he's driven down to the harbour, and he changes his shoes, puts on some great big pair of orange bother boots, as though he's going mountaineering, gets on the boat, they drive him around the harbour once, he gets out of the boat, changes his shoes, back in the helicopter, he's back to London, all about taking photographs. And he says, whilst he's there, he says he wanted to tell everybody how his plan is working about the boats, because there were 20% fewer crossings and small boats last month. Well, everybody knows that the weather was very bad in May, there was a lot of wind and so on, and 1 month figures don't count for anything anyway. But it was a little opportunity to seize and a chance for a photo opportunity. Then on Wednesday, he was off to see it for an audience with Biden, an opportunity to again try and look as though he's somebody on the world stage. And so he was very lucky. Biden granted him 5 minutes in the Oval Office and a press conference as well. In the meantime, he had a few pictures taken on a baseball pitch and all the rest of it. Everybody knows he's the Prime Minister of a really, really second-rate country that's in trouble. And yet this is all to try and big himself up. And he comes back with they signed an accord, an Atlantic Atlantic Declaration. Yeah, like the Declaration of Independence, Atlantic Declaration. This is all stuff about, it's accepted now we're not going to get a trade deal with America. And this is an agreement whereby we're going to try and cooperate in a bit of this and a bit of that, and just decoration. And the other thing he came back with was the fact that he wants to have a conference for AI in London in the autumn, and he wanted to get, I think he wanted to get Joe Biden's blessing. Is it all right? Is it all right if I'm in charge of, if I'm the prefect in charge of controlling AI over the whole world? And Biden said yes, and so he got all excited about that. And I was thinking about how utterly absurd this idea of him chairing a conference or taking over. He wants to be at the heart of controlling the growth of AI throughout the world. Do you know, I looked at some lists this morning. I looked at 4 different lists of the 100 biggest companies in the world involved in AI. We're not on any one of those 4 lists. There are about 15 European companies, the odd Indian, Japanese company, but we're not anywhere. We don't feature. It's true we've got some very good universities. It's true we're very, very good at IT development and so on. But the moment anybody develops anything in this country, and if it looks as though it's going to be a tall success, well, they're off to America. They're sell out. We're not a force. We are 20 years too late for this sort of initiative. It's a complete waste of time. But I suppose it makes him think he's a big shot and he's taken seriously. And so you kind of wonder, how much longer can this go on for? There's absolute chaos everywhere we look. There's chaos. There's inflation, and there's house prices are falling, and interest rates are going up, and we know that the price of food's going to go through the roof, and so on. And yet, a Prime Minister's just got nothing more to offer than these 5 ridiculous pledges. And you kind of sense that he knows that the game's up, really. He must know by now that he's not going to win the next general election. And you can't help feeling in their household. I think Mrs. I think his wife probably runs the show in that house. And you can't help feeling that they're planning for the future. And there was a there was a news report last week about it was partly about the fact that in his constituency there are schools that can't afford computers, and there are parents going round arranging fundraising events to try and raise money for. I think one was trying to raise they were trying to raise £10,000 for one school to buy some computers. And you think, computers are not that expensive. I mean, shouldn't every school, every pupil have computers by now that are issued by the schools? But at the same time, same day I think it was announced, Sunak's wife has just given $3 million to a college, a place called Claremont McKenna in California. And she's given all this money to this college for computers. I mean, apart from anything else, it's what they call the optics, isn't it? It just looks bad. We're doing so badly, and she's giving money to, and you have to say immediately, well, why is this? This college is a difficult college to get into. The fees are $86,500 a year. And they paid all this money, and parents who give a lot of money have preference when they try to get their children in. You buy a place for your children. They got two daughters, one's 10 and one's 12. Well, you can see, can't you? You can see after the next election, he's going to lose the election, and he'll 6 months later he'll say, I'm standing down, I've had enough of politics or whatever, and they'll be off to California, and the girls will go to this college she's given all this money to. And they'll say, sod the UK, don't ever set foot there again. At the same time, you've got Johnson just going around making money all right, left and centre, and you've got that idiotic trust with $155,000 a year pension for the rest of her life for 4 weeks of chaos. And you think, really, how unlucky we've been to have 3 such terrible prime ministers and in succession. Incidentally, on the question of Sunak's wife, I mean, she's supposed to be worth £500 million. It's said that she gets an income of approximately £11 million a year. And of course, for a long time she was non-dom, so she'd only have had to pay a very small amount, $50,000 a year or something in tax. So she avoided an awful lot of tax. But not only that, she doubles around in a few companies. And as I mentioned in an earlier video some time ago, several weeks ago, she was involved in some outfit called Dig Me Fitness, and this business that she was a director of it. And the business racked up debts of 3.2 million, I think it was, including £450,000 to the tax man, and they'd had somewhere between £300,000 and £800,000 in furlough money and so on. And then they decided they couldn't pay anymore, and so they just went bust. And she was the director who signed the form admitting they couldn't pay their debts. And so the people who were owed 3.2 million haven't got a penny. I think they raised £68,000 when they sold the assets. Well, that would have gone in fees. And this is a woman who can give £3 million to $3 million to an American college. No, I think he's really hopeless. I think he's really pathetic. He's so weak. You can see, as I said before, about this business with Johnson's honours list. He's obviously had to give in because Johnson's got some stuff that he could hand over to the inquiry, which would cause Sunak embarrassment, such as the fact that he was such a bad Chancellor. He wasn't a good Chancellor. He was a terrible Chancellor. He cost us billions and billions and billions. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say about him. I just finished by saying Johnson's honours list is just coming out, and I thought it was rather amusing that Nadine Dorries resigned earlier today, presumably believing she was going to be put in the House of Lords, as everybody thought she would, but she's not, apparently. She's not on the list. So I think smoke will be things will be in her household this evening. It'll be less than peaceful, I would have thought. And lovely to see that Jacob Rees-Mogg has got knighted for being, I think for being just a patronising, supercilious, idiotic twat. Anyhow, that's all I'm going to say for today. If you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And, until next time, bye for now.